Welcome back to Punishment of Operant Behavior. This is video part 2, beginning with ASR number 3. Negative reinforcement decreases the future probability of behavior. A, yes. B, no. A few more seconds. Alright, I'll go ahead and close the poll, and the answer here is B, no. Negative reinforcement increases the future probability of behavior. Negative doesn't mean bad. Positive doesn't mean good. Punishment doesn't mean bad either. Punishment means decrease future probability of behavior. Reinforcement increases the future probability of behavior. So if you still got this one wrong at this point, I suggest pausing this unit now and then going back to the prior unit and try to let's say retest yourself on the ASRs from the prior unit to assess which of those objectives on reinforcement you're missing, and maybe focus specifically on positive and negative reinforcement, the definition of reinforcement and examples of reinforcement. Try to figure out what you're missing there, and then come back and resume this unit. Okay, so let's continue. ASR 4, the little girl in your class entered the classroom chewing gum each of 5 consecutive days. That's what we would call a baseline, like the baseline in the timeout study that I just described. But chewing gum in class is against the rules. So to decrease gum chewing, you ask her to sit outside of the classroom for 1 minute, contingent on entering the room while chewing gum. As a result, the behavior ceases to continue in the future. The consequence for chewing gum was timeout. The act of sending her outside the classroom was A, punishment, B, a punisher, or C, neither. A few more seconds. Okay, I'll close the poll, and the answer is A, punishment. That's the process or procedure or operation. In this case, the act of sending her outside the classroom is the operation or the procedure. And in the same scenario, the timeout functioned as A, punishment, B, a punisher, C, punish, or D, a consequence. Give you a couple more seconds. Alright, I'll go ahead and close the poll. The best answer here is B, a punisher. That's the best term to use in this case. Timeout didn't function as punish. That grammatically doesn't make sense. And you may have thought about timeout functioned as punishment, but the emphasis here is on timeout as the consequence. And a consequence, if a consequence decreases the future probability the behavior will occur, then that consequence is a punisher. So that would be the best use of that term. Now, functioned as a consequence has no meaning. A consequence is not a function. Consequences have functions, either reinforcing or punishing. Okay, objective 3 is to list or complete a diagram of 4 types of punishment based on provenance and direction of change. Objective 4 is to identify descriptions of generalized conditioned punishers. So let's go through definitions. First, unconditioned punisher. A punisher with phylogenetic provenance. That means no prior learning led to the consequence functioning as punishment. Effectiveness is not due to prior pairing with other punishers. An unconditioned punisher can be positive or negative. Positive, something added. Negative, something removed or reduced. Positive can also be something increased. A conditioned punisher is a punisher with ontogenic provenance. It's due to learning. The consequence became a punisher through a prior history of pairing. It was a neutral stimulus paired with another punisher in the past. That pairing turned the neutral stimulus into a punisher. Now the neutral stimulus functions as a punisher. Okay? And the effectiveness depends on a learning history. A conditioned punisher can be positive or negative. It can be something added or increased, or something removed or reduced. A generalized condition punisher is a conditioned punisher previously paired with multiple punishing stimuli or events. And so a conditioned punisher can be highly effective because of its pairing with multiple punishing stimuli or events. For example, the loss of tokens as conditioned negative punishment related to multiple toys, privileges, activities, and snacks that could have or have been purchased with the tokens in the past. So, the types of punishment based on provenance are unconditioned and conditioned. Based on direction of change in the environment, that means the direction of the change of the environment that constitutes the consequence that is the punisher, can be positive or negative. So that's not direction of change of behavior. We know punishment decreases the future probability of behavior, so we wouldn't classify or diagram types of punishment based on that feature. They all have that feature. They're either conditioned or unconditioned, positive or negative. Examples of unconditioned punishers: very high heat, such as that touching the stove will result in contact with very high heat, which can very easily function as an unconditioned punisher for touching the hot stove in the future. Extreme cold, i.e. frostbite. Frostbite would be an unconditioned punisher for a behavior that one engaged in that resulted in them being in an extremely cold environment. Dehydration. Okay, so behavior that might result in dehydration, an unconditioned punisher, could be being on a 3-mile hike in the Grand Canyon without water. Right, so going on the hike without water could be punished by the automatic punisher, unconditioned punisher, of dehydration. Social isolation. So any behavior that produces social isolation could be punished by social isolation, and that wouldn't be due to learning. That would be an unconditioned punisher. Poisonous or nausea-inducing foods or drinks. Physical harm, such as being stabbed or punched. So the stabbing or the punching would be unconditioned punishers that would decrease the future probability that you engaged in the behavior that resulted in stabbing or punching. Electrocution, putting a finger in an electrical outlet, or putting a metal object in an electrical outlet that's wet. If that results in electrocution, that's going to decrease the future probability that behavior will repeat. It's an unconditioned punisher. Examples of conditioned punishers can be some foods. For some individuals, beer, sauteed spinach, or cake could be punishing. And I've given those examples of potential conditioned reinforcers in the prior unit, right? Because the reinforcing or punishing effects of consequences when reinforcement or punishment are conditioned are due to a learning history, so they can vary or differ between individuals or within individuals over time. Losing money or other resources, such as getting a speeding ticket, may be a conditioned punisher, right? But speeding ticket's probably not going to be a conditioned punisher for speeding if you're very wealthy. The loss of money could be considered a generalized condition punisher. So not necessarily the speeding ticket there. Okay, so the generalized that I put in brackets refers to the loss of money, okay, or resources. Verbal assault. Someone telling you something offensive, like you suck or something. Well, for some people, that might be a conditioned punisher, but for others, that might be, funny to them, and it might even, that type of if it's sarcastic, in the instance of sarcasm, perhaps sarcasm for some individuals is reinforcing for their behavior, others it isn't. Losing access to preferred items or activities. All right, lost driving privileges, for example. Well, it depends. It depends if those items or activities were reinforcers, and if they were, for a given individual, then their loss or removal is likely to function as conditioned punishment. But what preferred items and activities? What items and activities are preferred to you may be different than what are preferred to me and the next person, and therefore those preferred items or activities that would need to be the loss of some items and activities may not function as conditioned punishers for you as they would for me, and vice versa, or for your behavior and for my behavior rather. Some forms of attention, so someone talks negatively about you in public, could be a conditioned punisher for some people, maybe not others. Okay, so unconditioned and conditioned punishers. Let's do some ASRs. ASR 6. An unconditioned punisher is one which decreases behavior due to A, prior learning, B, ontogenic provenance, or C, phylogenic provenance. Give you a few more seconds. Okay, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is C, phylogenic provenance. Ontogenic provenance and prior learning are the same thing. ASR 7. A conditioned punisher is one which decreases behavior due to A, consequence conditional on the behavior, B, ontogenic provenance, or C, phylogenic provenance. Couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is B, ontogenic provenance, which means due to experience or prior learning. That's what conditioned is referring to here. Phylogenic provenance is not due to learning, it's due to natural selection. And so if you chose A, a consequence conditional on behavior, then you're using the word conditioned in the wrong way here. You should use it to refer to learned, or learning, or a learning experience, or a history of reinforcement and punishment, or punishment. Okay, so let's look at the direction of change in the environment now. We already looked at conditioned and unconditioned, or types of punishment based on provenance. So positive punishment is the immediate contingent application of a consequence which decreases the future probability the behavior will reoccur in a similar context. You can contrast that with negative punishment, which is the immediate removal of a reinforcer contingent on the occurrence of the target behavior, which decreases the future probability the behavior will reoccur in a similar context. Now, there's a difference here that was not planned. It says removal of a reinforcer contingent on the occurrence of the target behavior. This is an application of a consequence which decreases the future probability of behavior. So I hope that's not confusing here. The reason why this is immediate removal of a reinforcer is because in negative punishment, you're removing something from the environment or reducing something in the environment. So something in the environment has to be there. Okay, so there has to be an appetitive stimulus. And we haven't talked about appetitive stimuli, so we have to use a reinforcer here. So it's a stimulus that would be reinforcing. And when the behavior targeted for punishment occurs, you remove or reduce that item or activity or person that has functioned as a reinforcer for other behavior. You're removing it, and by removing that, it decreases the future probability the person will engage in the behavior that resulted in its removal. Okay, so but for positive punishment, it's just a continued application of a consequence. If I said application of a reinforcer, that wouldn't make any sense, because that would increase the future probability of behavior. So here we have immediate contingent application of a consequence. This is the immediate removal of a reinforcer, and the consequence is that removal of the reinforcer. Okay. So positive, something added; negative, something removed generally. That's how the easy way to do it. So examples of potential positive punishers. Okay, so contingent on the behavior targeted for punishment, a verbal reprimand may be a positive punisher. Physical restraint may function as a positive punisher. Other types of restraint, like mechanical restraint, such as arm braces to prevent someone from raising their arm up to harm themselves. Response blocking. Redirection. The requirement to complete effortful tasks. And contingent exercise. positive practice, and overcorrection. Now, we're not getting into detail on these potential punishers, these procedures or operations, because that's for another class. That's for the next class in this series, which is classroom and behavior management in students with disabilities. In that class, we're going to get into detail on these procedures, and you'll learn about how they're used. For now, I want you to list them so that when you get to that unit, they'll be familiar to you, and you'll relate them to all that you've learned here in this unit on punishment of operant behavior. Okay. Examples of potential negative punishers. So what I just said, same thing goes for these procedures or operations. Removal of attention, token removal, the removal of reinforcing items or activities, removal of the opportunity to request reinforcers, timeout from positive reinforcement, response costs such as point fines, penalties, or loss of privileges. Now, this is a table which lists examples of punishment procedures and studies which illustrate those techniques. This is from Mattson and Kazin in 1981. This was a nice comprehensive list of the variety of punishment procedures that were used historically up to that time, or that were studied in research. And so I provide this just to give you a historical perspective on the types of procedures that were used in the past. And some of these procedures are now largely considered unethical and maybe illegal. And so that's important to consider. Mostly I want you just to see how far we've come in how far behavior analysts have come in trying to develop a variety of punishment procedures that are minimally or not harmful at all, that may not even, maybe only minimally aversive, which don't require a lot of effort, and which are more socially acceptable and can be applied in a wide variety of contexts. Behavior analysts have done a lot of work in this area and come a long way. So just take a look at this list here, and then it may be helpful even when you take the next course in this series, when you take classroom and behavior management, and we get into more depth in punishment procedures. You come back to this list here and compare them, and you'll see that behavior analysts have made pretty great progress in this area. So examples of aversive stimuli, which you won't see anymore these days: slaps, or cold baths, or contingent electric shock, or spraying mouth freshener. I'm not even sure what that is. Shame, or television distortions. These types of things were studied way back when there was very very few effective treatments for severe challenging behavior. So there was pressure, and at this time, in the 60s and the 70s, for behavior analysts to develop procedures that would help people for whom nothing else worked. And then work and penalty procedures such as overcorrection, response cost, contingent exercise, negative practice, and then some additional ones: facial screening. You won't see that anymore. Okay, let's do some ASRs. ASR 8 is when the dog passed the shock collar perimeter in the backyard. It received a strong shock that decreased the future probability the dog would pass the perimeter. The shock was A, a positive punisher, or B, negative punisher. A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll go ahead and close the poll, and the answer is A, positive punisher. ASR 9, the student was running in the hall at school, slipped on a freshly mopped floor, and hit their head on the floor. In the future, they stopped running down the hall. Hitting their head on the floor functioned as a positive punisher, A, or a negative punisher, B. more seconds. Okay, I'll close the poll. The answer is A, positive punishment. ASR 10. The student would have gone to recess, but recess was withheld to decrease their shouting out in class without raising their hand. This consequence decreased shouting out in the future and therefore functioned as a positive punisher, A, or negative punisher, B. A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll. The answer is B, negative punisher. Alright, that wraps up this video part. We'll begin the next video part with this table.